There is a generation of British people who cannot throw away a margarine tub. They wash it, dry it, and put it in a cupboard that already holds 11 other margarine tubs. They switch lights off in rooms other people are still sitting in. They eat everything on the plate, whether they want it or not. They flinch at the price of a coffee they can easily afford. And they answer the question, how are you, with the words mustn't grumble, even when they have every right to grumble. None of it is accidental. Those habits were installed one by one by a country that kept switching the lights off. So today, 7 habits that define the people who grew up in 1970s Britain and the exact events that fitted every single one of them. Psychologists now have names for most of what happened to the children of that decade. And by the end of this video, you will understand why that generation thinks, saves, worries, and copes the way it does. Because the 70s did not just happen to Britain. They happened to the inside of people's heads, and the wiring is still in there 50 years later. Number 1, they cannot throw anything away. Start with where they came from, because the 70s child was raised by people with ration books in their memory. Wartime food rationing did not fully end in Britain until 1954, which means the parents running those 70s households had learned to cook, shop, and hoard under actual scarcity, and they passed the reflexes straight down the table. Then, the decade confirmed everything those parents had taught. In 1974, a genuine sugar shortage emptied British shops for weeks. There was no official rationing. The shopkeepers did it themselves, a bag per customer under the counter for regulars, and mothers bought sugar wherever they saw it, whether they needed it or not, and stored it. See it, buy it, keep it, just in case. Then, in the late 70s, it happened again with bread, when flour shortages and a baker's strike put queues round the block outside bakeries and shops limited loaves per family. A childhood that includes empty shelves teaches one deep lesson, that the shops can simply run out. Researchers studying childhood scarcity have found that lesson does not fade. It tends to harden into adult habit, however comfortable the adult later becomes, which is why their children mock the drawer full of carrier bags and the cupboard full of margarine tubs. The drawer is not daft. The drawer is a memory. Number 2, they treat money like it might bolt at any moment. In August 1975, inflation on the official measure reached almost 27%, the worst peacetime figure Britain has ever recorded. The pounds in a child's piggy bank were quietly rotting, because money saved in January bought noticeably less by Christmas, and every adult conversation in the country seemed to circle back to what things cost now against what they had cost last year. An average house cost around £4,400 at the start of the decade, and roughly £20,000 by the end, more than quadrupled in 10 years, while wages chased prices up the same staircase. Even the coins themselves could not be trusted, because on the 15th of February 1971, Decimal Day, the entire currency changed under their feet, and every grandparent in Britain began a lifetime of converting prices back into old money out loud. Big purchases happened on the Never Never, higher purchase paid off week by week, and the national obsession was Green Shield stamps, licked into books at the kitchen table over months and exchanged for a toaster. In 1973, the company behind them turned its catalogue showrooms into a chain where you could simply buy the goods instead. It was called Argos. Psychologists have shown that the economic weather of your early years leaves measurable fingerprints on your adult money habits, on saving, on distrust of borrowing, on physical discomfort at waste. The 70-year-old with a comfortable pension who still winces at the price of a sandwich is not being difficult. The wince was fitted in 1975, and it does not come out. Number 3, they keep the heating suspiciously low, and a jumper is the answer. We misremember how cold that Britain was. In 1972, the official household survey found only 37% of homes had central heating, which means nearly 2/3 of the country woke on winter mornings to ice on the inside of the bedroom window. You dressed under the covers. You knew exactly which patch of the house was warm, because there was only one, and the whole family lived in it. Most homes had no telephone either, only 42% did, and the television in the corner was very likely rented from Radio Rentals or one of its rivals, because early colour sets cost a fortune and broke down constantly, so millions of families paid for theirs by the month, and the arrival of the rental man to install a colour set was a street-level event, with the neighbours' children finding sudden reasons to visit. Heat, in that Britain, was rationed by habit rather than by law. The fire went on in one room in the evening. Hot water bottles went up the stairs at bedtime, and the rest of the house was simply accepted as outdoors with a roof. A person who spent their first 15 winters cold does not experience a warm house as normal. They experience it as spending, which is why, to this day, the thermostat in that generation's house is a negotiation you will lose. Number 4, they can cope with almost anything. Here is the decade in one list. By February 1972, a miners' strike had cut coal to the power stations. The government declared a state of emergency, and homes were put on rota power cuts, dinner by candlelight because the whole street had gone dark. From the 1st of January 1974, industry was put on a 3-day week to save electricity, and that winter television itself was switched off by law at 10:30. The screen simply ended before the day did, a whole nation sent to bed by the government like a naughty child. In the summer of 1976, the reservoirs ran dry, whole neighbourhoods queued at standpipes in the street with buckets, and the government appointed an actual Minister for Drought, Dennis Howell, at the end of August. Within days it began to rain, and Britain being Britain, this was treated as his greatest achievement. And the decade went out with the winter of discontent. Strikes across the public services in the coldest winter for 16 years, rubbish piled in Leicester Square high enough to become a tourist attraction, and Liverpool Council storing unburied bodies in a factory in Speke because the gravediggers were out. Children absorbed all of it, from the back seat, from the top of the stairs, from the queue, outside the baker's. And notice what the adults around them did each time. They lit the candles, made the tea, and carried on. Nobody panicked because panicking was considered showing off. Grow up like that, and the rug moving under you is not a crisis, it is a Tuesday. That generation keeps its weight low and its expectations flexible, because instability was their childhood's background noise. And the lesson underneath it all was that things break, and then they get fixed. And in the meantime, you queue. That is the hardship half of the story, and on its own it would explain a careful, watchful generation. But the second half of the wiring came from something modern parents would call neglect, and psychologists now argue was the most valuable thing that childhood gave them. Number 5. They do not need watching, and they never really have. A child in 1970s left the house after breakfast with pocket money jangling, stopped at the sweet shop where a quarter of sherbet lemons was weighed from a jar into a white paper bag, and then disappeared until the streetlights came on. Nobody knew where they were, and nobody could check because the house had no phone. One famous study traced a single Sheffield family across 4 generations and mapped how far each child was allowed to roam. The great-grandfather, aged 8 in the 20s, walked 6 miles alone to go fishing. The modern child of that family could go 300 yards. And the 70s child sat in between with the run of the whole estate, the park and the swimming pool. No adult in sight. A freedom the next generation would never be given. They fell out of trees onto concrete because soft playground surfacing barely existed, and they rode in cars with no child seats and unfastened belts because wearing one in the front did not become law until the last day of January 1983. The state's answer to all this danger was not supervision, it was adverts. Charlie Says from 1973, a cat voiced by Kenny Everett, and from 1975, the Green Cross Code Man played by Dave Prowse, the same man who, inside a different costume, was Darth Vader. Modern psychology has caught up with what that freedom was worth. Peter Gray and his colleagues published a major review arguing that the collapse of independent, unsupervised childhood activity is a serious cause of the rise in anxiety among the young. A child who roams, risks, falls and copes builds the deep sense that they can handle things. Take away the roaming and the risk and you take away the practice. The 70s child got more of that practice than almost any generation before or since. And do not underestimate the boredom. An empty street, 3 channels, no phone, and a whole Sunday afternoon is a kind of training nobody signs up for because a bored child with nothing provided has to invent everything: the game, the rules, the teams, and the argument about the rules. That generation's famous ability to just get on with it was built in exactly those hours. Number 6. They never make a fuss. The rules of a 1970s British household were unwritten and absolute. Children should be seen and not heard. Big boys don't cry. Worse things happen at sea. School enforced the same settlement with the cane and the slipper, which stayed legal in state schools right through the decade, and were not banned until the late 80s. In 1971, the government stopped free school milk for the over sevens, Labour having already taken it from the secondary schools a few years earlier, and the education secretary who signed it off, one Margaret Thatcher, was chanted at in playgrounds for years as Thatcher Thatcher Milk Snatcher. In 1972, the school leaving age went up to 16, catching a generation that had expected to be out earning at 15. And the discipline was not the strange part to the children living it, because it was universal. Every school had a cane, every teacher had a name, and the worst part of getting in trouble at school was that news of it usually beat you home. A generation raised on power cuts and bread queues by parents raised on actual bombs learned that feelings were something you kept in the same cupboard as the margarine tubs. Ask them how they are, and the reply comes back automatic, not too bad, mustn't grumble, can't complain. 3 ways of saying nothing, polished over a lifetime. Modern psychology would call some of it emotional suppression and point at the costs, and it would have a point. But it was not nothing. It was armor, fitted early for a world that kept requiring it. Number 7. They all carry the same memories. Whatever set your family rented, it received 3 channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. And that was the entire universe of television until Channel 4 arrived in November 1982. So the whole country watched the same things at the same time. The Morecambe and Wise Christmas show of 1977 was credited for years with an audience over 28 million. And although modern researchers reckon the true figure was nearer 21 million, think what that smaller number still means. On one evening, roughly 1 in 3 people in Britain sat in front of the same jokes at the same moment. And the next morning, everyone at school and everyone at work had seen exactly what you had seen. Even the disasters were communal. A power cut was not your family's problem, it was the whole street's, and the whole street stood at its front doors in the dark, talking. Shared hardship is miserable and bonding in equal measure. And the 70s supplied both in industrial quantities. It is why 2 strangers of that generation can meet anywhere on earth and be friends within 4 sentences, because they are not really strangers. They watched the same childhood. Put the 7 together and the psychology of people who grew up in 1970s, Britain stops being a mystery and becomes almost an equation. Scarcity taught them to save, store, and never waste. Instability taught them to expect the rug to move so they keep their weight low. Freedom taught them they could cope with almost anything because they had been coping since they were 8. Suppression taught them to do it quietly, and togetherness taught them that you get through it with the people around you, ideally over a cup of tea, with the good biscuits that are being saved for a visitor who never quite comes. They are the generation that checks the weather but goes out anyway. That finds modern life faintly ridiculous. 30 channels of nothing on, coffee at the price of a 1970s weekly shop, children driven half a mile to school in padded seats. And underneath the grumbling they know, and the research increasingly agrees with them, that the childhood which looked like deprivation from the outside handed them something on the way out. Resilience that was earned, not taught. Patience that was practiced on real cues. And the unshakable conviction that whatever happens next, they have seen worse, by candlelight at 10:30, after the telly was turned off by the government. If you grew up in that Britain, tell me in the comments the one habit from those years you have never managed to shake, because I read everyone and the memories in the comments are always better than the video. And if this took you back, subscribe, because there is a lot more of that Britain still to talk about.